Hi everyone, and welcome to this drawing video. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to draw a robin. I decided to use some coloured pencils for this drawing as I wanted to show up the nice and bright colours of a robin. In terms of the materials I'm using a mechanical pencil with HB leads on smooth Bristol board paper, along with some Prismacolor pencils for the colouring, and I also, at the end of this drawing, decided to use a Uniball Sigma Broad white ink pen to add some highlights, but that's just something that I wanted to do and it's not necessary if you don't want to. But please don't worry too much about the equipment you're using. As long as you have a pencil and paper in front of you and some coloured pencils at hand, you'll be fine and you'll be able to create something like this. So I started off by sketching the robin's head and its beak, and its eye is very close to the corner of its mouth. The eye is also very large in proportion to this area. After that, I sketched the robin's round body. It's very circular in shape, which actually makes this drawing much easier. I added some outlines of some stray feathers around the bottom of the robin's belly, and also added some stray feathers around the back of its head and moving downwards towards the wing. And also started placing some ideas of the patterns of the feathers around the robin's body and face, where I was going to place the brown, white and orange feathers later on. Moving outwards from the circle of the robin's body, I placed some basic outlines of some wings and the robin's tail. I'm not worrying too much about the details or any particular individual feathers or anything like that at this stage. It's all about just getting the basic outlines down, and then I'll start adding the individual feathers and the details later on when I'm working on the colouring. And for the final part of the sketch, I added the robin's feet. Each foot has 3 toes in front and 1 toe at the back. And lastly, for the sketching process, I added the branch that the robin is standing on. Then it was time to start adding the colouring to this drawing, and for this, as I mentioned before, I used Prismacolor pencils, starting by adding the dark brown colouring to the top of the robin's head. For this I used dark umber, dark brown, sienna brown and a white Prismacolor pencil. Starting with the dark umber, adding some quick fine strokes with that pencil, adding the darkest colouring towards the back of the robin's head and kind of blending it inwards towards the front of the head. After that, I added some extra layers, quick fine strokes with the dark brown pencil, and then moved on to adding some quick fine strokes with the sienna brown. Once I'd added these layers, I then used the white Prismacolor pencil to add some streaks of white across all of this and to blend those colours together, flattening some areas and kind of just creating an interesting kind of layered texture. In some areas I also used the dark umber pencil again over the top of this white pencil to add some extra dark shading and to show some dark layers in between some of the feathers. For the colouring of the robin's beak, I used a mixture of dark umber and black Prismacolor pencil at first, and then used the white Prismacolor pencil over the top of them to blend them into each other. I also made sure to leave a highlighted ridge along the top part of the beak to show the separation between these two areas. For the robin's eye, I used a black Prismacolor pencil, and I started by adding a very thick black outline going all the way around it, and then I added some outlines of where I wanted to leave the highlights. After that, I added some very dark shading towards the bottom of the eye and added some medium shading towards the top of the eye, and left a highlighted ridge along the lower lid. And leaving those highlights in the eye and on the eyelid really helped to make that eye stand out, and they also really help to add to the realism of the drawing. Moving on from that, it was time to add the orange colouring to the robin's face. For this, the main 2 colours that I started with were pale vermilion and orange. I started by using the pale vermilion first, as it's the darker of the 2 colours, adding some quick fine strokes in all different directions to show up that fluffy texture of these types of feathers. And then after that I used the orange pencil over the top of that to just blend into it and to also add some more stray feathers towards the front of the robin's face. Just changing between these 2 pencils and creating lots of layers, and also blending them outwards and into the brown feathers towards the back of the robin's head. After using the pale vermilion and the orange, I then decided to bring in another colour, that being poppy red. This is a very orange type of red, but it's much darker than the previous 2 colours. So using quick fine strokes of this was very effective in showing up a different layer of feathers. I also found that in areas where I wanted to blend these orange colours and to lighten up some of those feathers, especially towards the front of the robin, I was using a light peach pencil in the same way that I used the white pencil on the brown feathers. This light peach was a great way of lightening up some of the those orange feathers towards the front. I followed the same process for the rest of the robin's chest, using the pale vermilion and the orange pencils first, and then using the poppy red after that to add some darker texturing, especially towards the right side of that orange section. I made sure to add the quick fine strokes and the texturing in all different random directions that you'd expect of feathers like this, like the fluffy ones on the front of the robin. And in areas where I placed some larger feathers, I tried to create the texture of the feather with the white Prismacolor pencil. So as you can see towards the lower part of the robin's chest, I've used a very sharp white pencil to add some very fine lines. Moving on from that, it was time to add the colouring to the lower part of the robin's belly, and this is just a bunch of white feathers. So for this I used a black Prismacolor pencil first to try and create a layered effect with the feathers going in different directions, kind of adding some dark outlines to some of the feathers, like individual feathers, and then using the white Prismacolor pencil over the top of all of it to blend between them and to make that shading less harsh. I found that where I wanted to have the highlighted area, it was best not to add too many lines, and it was best to keep it kind of minimal. This was more effective in a way. I followed the same process all the way around to the back of the robin. This area required a bit more shading, so I used a bit more of the black pencil and just tried to create as best of a layered effect as I could, basically just relying on the shading and the highlights. Adding some shading underneath individual feathers, also using a sharpened pencil to create that very fine textured effect of each feather, and just trying to create the effect of them moving in different directions as well. I blended in a little bit of colour to this area as well with the sienna brown pencil. For the back of the robin and its wings, I used the same process that I did for the back of its head. So I started off with the dark umber, adding some quick fine strokes, and then built up the layers with the dark brown pencil and the sienna brown. And then finally, to add that final part of the texture, I used the white Prismacolor pencil over the top of all of it to just create those highlights and to show the different directions that the feathers are moving. For the wing, I actually decided to use the black Prismacolor pencil to add the dark shading between each long feather. This area required a bit more shading between the layers to show up that effect of the feathers kind of overlapping, and I think that using the dark black pencil really works well for this. Also using the white Prismacolor pencil to add the highlighted lines between all of those dark areas, and just to show up each individual layer of feathers. I actually used a very similar process for the colouring of the robin's tail feathers, where I started by using the dark umber and the dark brown, and then used the black Prismacolor pencil to define the area between each feather and to really define the shape of each individual one. And then after that I used the white Prismacolor pencil to blend that brown colouring of each feather. For the colouring of the last part of the robin, that being the robin's feet, I used a mixture of poppy red, carmine red and magenta. I mainly used magenta as it had a very nice pinky tone to it. Once all of those colours have been placed down, I then used the white pencil over the top of them to blend between them all, and then used the black Prismacolor pencil to add some wrinkles and some textures to the skin and to add each claw. For the final touches on this drawing, I added some green colouring to the branch that the robin is standing on. For the green colouring I used a mixture of apple green, olive green and dark green. And then as a final touch across all of the areas of this drawing, I used my Uniball highlighter pen to add some highlights to the branch, to the robin's feet, and to add some highlights to some of the feathers, and to add some stray bits of feather where I wanted to. And after that, this drawing was completed. I honestly really enjoyed working on another colours drawing like this, and I really hope this video helps out in some way. If you do follow this video along, or if you've worked on anything similar, then feel free to show me your work on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. I'd absolutely love to see. If you enjoy watching videos like this, then make sure you're subscribed, and any likes, shares, that kind of support is always hugely appreciated, and it really means a lot to me. If you want to follow my progress photos and keep up to date with everything I'm working on, then be sure to check out the links in the description box below to check out my Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And once again, thank you so much for the support on this channel. I really hope this video helps out in some way. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all soon.